To the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Voxversity. Thanks for swinging by and tuning in. You know, Robert Heinlein wrote about the crazy years, and frankly, I don't think that he really had the ability to foresee just how crazy the United States was going to become. You know, when he was writing essentially about pre-1965 America. And so what he was thinking of and what he was building on was an extrapolation of an America that was still white. It was an America that was crazy, but it was a crazy white America. But what we're seeing, the craziness that we're seeing, is simply beyond anything that was imaginable back in, back in the 1960s, even the 1970s and 1980s. It's true. We are reaching levels of batshit insanity that shouldn't even be possible. And yet we haven't even begun to plumb the depths of it. You know, the extent of the Hollywood values and the degeneracy of the Hollywood values and the way those Hollywood values have really destroyed so many American lives is just incredible. And it was kind of interesting too. You know, I mean, we are just skimming the surface because stuff is going to come out about people, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, people that you're not necessarily expecting. Now, we don't know how much is actually going to come out, but, this stuff, the clues were there, just like people are looking at Kevin Spacey, and story after story is now coming out. The way that they were joking about it. Absolutely. Spielberg and Lucas are both very, very questionable on these particular issues. And it's kind of interesting because, I have always disliked Steven Spielberg's movies. And I didn't know why. There was something about, you don't really bother me because I never saw E.T. But what really bothered me at the time was the whole little kid penis breath thing. That's a pretty weird thing for a kid who wasn't, I have brothers that age. I could remember being that age. And that was not the kind of thing that anyone said. And so, there was just some strangeness to it. The whole E.T. thing, the whole, there was something that bothered me about that. And then what was interesting was that if you think about the, Private Ryan and Band of Brothers, they were good, but they were dishonest. Spielberg always puts Jews in places that they were not actually where they were not actually there, or increases the role. In Band of Brothers, the Harvard-educated Jewish guy, who actually was one of my favorite characters of Band of Brothers, was really not somebody that you would have expected to be in that position. And also, there's just some kind, it's just a slight sense of something being a bit off. And so, but what was interesting is that somebody pointed out a discussion. Now, do you remember the scene where Indiana Jones first meets what's her name, Karen Allen, and she makes a comment about how they had had an affair and how she was just a child then, and he knew it was wrong. Now, what was interesting was that you can look this up. I posted it on my blog some months ago, and this is something he and Lucas are discussing the script. They're discussing this scene, and they wanted to make her. They thought it would be interesting to make her. I think it was 12 years old. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so and I think what they did was they bumped it up a little bit. They bumped it up, her age up just a little bit, but they wanted to keep it young enough. And here's the damning thing: they wanted to keep her age young enough to keep it interesting. Because once she got to be 15 or so, then that wasn't interesting anymore. So, there is a amount. There's always been an amount of weirdness related to children around Steven Spielberg. So it won't surprise me. We're already hearing that there's going to be considerably more coming out of Hollywood. This is in Raiders of the Lost Ark, yes. You can look it up. Look up that quote about I was in love, I was a child, you knew it was wrong. If you search that on the internet, you will find this interview. It was actually filmed, and I think there's a transcript of it. So, anyhow, how does this relate to Trump? That's a good question. Well, the way that it relates to Trump is directly related to what I just said about him being a greater president than Ronald Reagan. And what Donald Trump is doing is he is confronting the evil that currently infests the United States of America. He is putting America first, and one of America's biggest problems is its moral degeneracy, its moral depravity, and the substitution of Hollywood values for Christian values, the substitution of Judeo-Christ for Jesus Christ. These are both symptoms and causes of American decline. And so the family is the core of society. Without family, without strong family, you don't have a society, you don't have a stable society, you don't have a stable core around which the society can stand, can rest. And Hollywood, the Hollywood values is one of the most significant weaknesses of the current degeneracy of American society. And so, and I find this very fascinating because a lot of people say, well, Donald Trump is, all the traditional conservatives and the Cuckservatives and all this sort of thing. They're all, oh, well, look at Donald Trump. He's married 3 times and all this kind of accurate doubts about Donald Trump, the man, and his character. But here's the interesting thing from a Christian point of view, is that God often works through deeply flawed men. I know that myself because I know the full extent of my own flaws. I'm a deeply flawed individual. And yet there have been people who have told me that they believe that God has worked through me in some way that has affected them. Abraham was flawed. Paul was flawed. The Apostle Peter was flawed. So the idea that Donald Trump cannot be used by God because of his flaws is false. I said during the campaign, early on the campaign, long before he had locked in the nomination, I said that I was supporting Donald Trump because I felt that he was the only possible hope. Not that he was any sort of guarantee, not that he was any sort of sure thing, but it was definitely the case that he was the only one who could possibly do anything about that. And the interesting thing is that it's very clear that Donald Trump does care deeply about America and Americans. One of the most important things that he ever said was when he said, I am here to take the arrows for you. I'm here to take the slings and arrows for you. And not only that, he said it was his privilege to do so. Many a arrogant man has learned humility through the challenges that he comes to face. He didn't need to do that. If he wanted to be hanging out on Epstein's Island, doing what these Hollywood degenerates do with their Washington friends, that's he could have done that. He could have done that. Instead, he took on this role where he is getting constantly trashed, constantly attacked, constantly betrayed, and he knew that was going to be the case going in. Why does a man do that? Why does a man take on that role? He does it because he believes he doesn't have any other choice. He does it believes that it is the right thing to do. And he does it because he believes there isn't anyone else who can. And so, I would encourage those of you who are Christians to pray for the president, because he is under attack morally, spiritually, materially. He is under attack in every way. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because what we're seeing happen, what we're seeing unmasked, what we're seeing the truth come out, it is because this man and the people that work for him and the people that work with him are working very, very hard to expose these things. It is not a coincidence that this happens. It is not a coincidence that this stuff is happening. Ben Shapiro doesn't understand these things because Ben Shapiro is, despite his talk, on the side of the Hollywood degenerates. His loyalty to them is based on his identity. Identity politics always, always, always trump ideology in the end. I guarantee it. You will see Ben Shapiro come out in defense of these people at some point in time, because the cost of not doing so means that he will be expelled. I am not a white nationalist. I'm an American Indian. I am a red reservationist. My tribe has a reservation. We have our own sovereign nation. You know, I am no more a white nationalist than I am a Japanese nationalist. So don't make false accusations. The answer to immigration is mass deportation. That's going to happen at some point in time. You know, Trump has even made some suggestions that way. He has talked about restoring the demographic balance. That means that at some point in time, there will be mass deportations. Well, omni-nationalism just means that you support other nations, which I do. I absolutely support the Jewish nation of Israel. I absolutely support the German nation in Germany. You know, these are positions that are right, they are moral, they are true, and they are in line with historical reality. Look, don't try to engage me in debate about unrelated issues. Don't try to play the SJW game of discredit and disqualify. It hasn't worked in 16 years. It's not going to start working for you now. I am smarter than you are. I am probably better educated than you are. Don't bother trying to play these games that people have been trying to play with me for 16 years, okay? The demographics that I would wish for the U.S. to have are the promised demographics of 1964. That's what the American people were told they would continue to have when the 1965 Immigration Act took place. That's what it should have. That's what it should have stayed if America was going to stay strong and unified. Exactly. Hart-Celler absolutely must be repealed. The promise was made by Senator Ted Kennedy saying that the Hart-Celler Act was not going to alter the demographic balance of the United States. That was a blatant lie. So, anyhow, the cost of this has been tremendously terrible. You know, the average national IQ has fallen. The USA is literally dumber than it used to be, as are many European nations. You know, and yes, we had a 45-year immigration pause from 1920 to 1965. We probably need a longer one now. We also probably need significant repatriations. Tommy Kramer. And so, you know, it's going to be interesting to see what will happen. But the thing is that with Donald Trump in office, with Donald Trump draining the swamp, building the wall, putting America first, and working hard to make America great again, working hard to make America American again, there is a chance. You have it backwards. If there aren't repatriations, there will be civil war. And it is more likely than mass deportations. I agree. That's why I've said that the United States is likely to break apart around the year 2033. And please note that I wrote that publicly something like 12 years ago. This has been obvious. You know, and it's true. Like the commenter just said, diversity plus proximity equals war. That is what has always been the case. You know, if you read Immigration and War, and I'm working on the first Voxversity video right now, immigration is war. And war is immigration. They are generally the same thing when taken in context. So, anyhow, that's all I have. But you know, I think that we need to remember that we're very fortunate, and that we are very lucky that we have the opportunity to have a man like Donald Trump in the presidency, in the White House, actually looking out for American interests for the first time in decades. Have a good evening. We will see you soon. Don't know why this thing won't stop. That changed thing frustrating.